They replaced me with a stranger and toasted him at my father's table. They called begging the night that stranger burned everything down. The night my family called begging, I was standing at my kitchen sink in Charlotte, North Carolina, rinsing a coffee mug I'd used twice already that day because I'd been too busy to wash it the first time. It was 9:14 p.m. on a Wednesday. My phone buzzed on the counter. I looked down. It was my Aunt Abina. I hadn't spoken to her in 14 months. Not because we'd fought. Because when my family drew their circle tight, she was inside it, and I was not. I let it ring. It rang again at 9:17. Then a text. Zola, please. It's about your father. The business. Things have gone very wrong. I set the mug down. Dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. Stood at that window for a long moment, looking at the parking lot lights below my building. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I just thought so it finally happened. Before I tell you what had gone wrong, I need to take you back. Back to the beginning. Back to the version of this family that looked, from the outside, like something worth envying. My name is Zola Ferreira. I'm 34 years old. I am the oldest daughter of Emmanuel and Graca Ferreira, my father Mozambican, my mother Cape Verdean, two people who arrived in this country in 1987 with almost nothing and built, across 30 years, something genuinely remarkable. A freight and logistics company called Ferreira Transport, based out of Charlotte. 12 trucks. A small warehouse on the east side. Contracts with 3 regional distributors. My father's name on the door, my mother's handwriting in the original ledgers. I am a licensed CPA. I co-own a small accounting firm with my business partner, Sandra, 7 miles from the warehouse where I spent most of my teenage years doing homework on a folding table while my father argued rates on the phone. I say all of this not to impress you. I say it so you understand what kind of person I am. I am someone who reads contracts before she signs them. Someone who keeps records. Someone who, when her father handed her a stack of founding documents at age 19 and said, "Hold on to these, Zola, you're the careful one," kept them. For 15 years, I kept them. In a fireproof lockbox, in the closet of every apartment I ever lived in, through 2 cities and 1 very bad relationship, and a master's degree I finished while working full-time. I kept them because my father asked me to. I had no idea for a long time what they actually meant. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. What came next took 3 years to build, and 1 dinner to destroy. Let me tell you about Kofi Mensah. He arrived at our family's Easter dinner in 2018 the way certain people always arrive, carrying something. In his case, it was a bottle of palm wine and a story about knowing my brother Marcus from their days at NC State. He was charming. Warm handshake. Called my father sir on the first meeting without being prompted. Laughed at the right moments. Helped clear the table without being asked. My mother said, driving home that night, that one is good home training. My father said nothing. But he smiled the way he smiled when he'd already made a decision and was just waiting for the room to catch up. I thought nothing of it. People come to Easter dinner. People leave. Life continues. Kofi Mensah did not leave. By the following Christmas, he was at the table again. By spring of 2019, he was stopping by the warehouse on Saturdays, just to help, he said, just to learn the business, he said, because he admired what my father had built. By the summer of 2020, my father had given him a job title. Operations Coordinator. A salary I was not told the number of. An office 2 doors down from my father's, in the building I had helped my parents pay the deposit on when I was 26 years old and had just passed my CPA exam and felt, for the first time, like I was genuinely useful to the people I loved. I want to be precise about the timeline because precision matters here. I spent 6 years, helping my father with the financial side of Ferreira Transport. Not as an employee, as a daughter. Evenings, weekends, tax season. I reconciled accounts, reviewed vendor contracts, caught a $14,000 billing error from a fuel supplier in 2017 that my father would never have found on his own. I built their bookkeeping system from a spiral notebook and a prayer into actual accounting software. I trained the office manager on how to use it. I was never offered a salary. I was never offered a title. I was offered dinner and gratitude, and my mother's rice and fish on Sundays, and my father's hand on my shoulder saying, "Zola, I don't know what we'd do without you." And then Kofi Mensah arrived with his bottle of palm wine and his good home training. And slowly, the way water finds its level, I was moved to the edge. The company email thread stopped including me sometime in late 2020. I noticed but said nothing. The vendor I'd built a relationship with over 4 years started CCing Kofi instead of me on invoices. I noticed that too. Then came the moment I could not explain away. My father refinanced the warehouse in March 2021. $180,000 equity loan against the property. He used it to purchase 2 new trucks and expand the Eastern route operation. Kofi signed the authorization paperwork as Director of Operations. I found out from Marcus. Casually. Over the phone. Like it was something I already knew. Dad finally pulled the trigger on the expansion. Kofi's been pushing for it for months. Good move, right? I remember exactly where I was standing. My office, 3rd floor, window facing the street. I had a pen in my hand, and I set it down very carefully on my desk, because something in me understood that if I didn't do that one small controlled thing, I might do something else entirely. Good move, right? I said yes. I got off the phone, and I sat with that for a long time. What they didn't know was I still had the documents. But before the documents mattered, there was a dinner. And that dinner changed everything. My father turned 62 in October 2021. My mother planned the celebration for 3 months. Rented the banquet hall at the Cornerstone Event Center on Albemarle Road, the same hall where my parents had celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, where Marcus had his graduation party, where our church community had gathered for every significant moment in the Ferreira family's life for the past 15 years. 61 guests. A catered jollof rice, fried plantain, grilled tilapia. A live band my mother had hired from a Ghanaian cultural association 2 cities over. White tablecloths. Centerpieces with gold candle holders. My mother had been planning this the way she planned everything, completely precisely, and without once asking me what I thought. I wore a green dress I'd bought specifically for that night. Showed up early to help set the tables. Greeted relatives I hadn't seen since before the pandemic. Smiled until my face ached. Kofi arrived 40 minutes late in a new suit and was greeted at the door by my father like a returning soldier. The dinner was beautiful. The food was perfect. The band played my father's favorite High Life songs and people danced between courses, and for a few hours it felt like the family I remembered from childhood, before everything shifted. Then my father stood up to speak. He tapped his glass. The room quieted. 61 people turned toward Emmanuel Ferreira, this man who had built something from nothing, and waited. He thanked God. He thanked my mother, the spine of everything I am, and the room applauded warmly. He thanked Marcus for always making him proud. He thanked the warehouse team, the drivers, the office staff. Then he looked across the room at Kofi Mensah and raised his glass. "And this one," my father said, his voice thick with something I can only describe as pride, the specific, unguarded kind he never bothered to hide. "This one came into our lives and reminded me what it means to have a son who wants to carry what you've built. Kofi, you are not just an employee. You are family. You are the son God sent us, when we weren't looking." The room erupted. Applause. Laughter. Someone whistled from the back. My mother was crying. Marcus was on his feet. I sat completely still in my green dress with my hands folded in my lap, and I looked at my father. This man I had driven 4 hours round trip to help every tax season for 6 consecutive years, and I waited. I waited for my name. He sat down. My name did not come. Not once. Not in the toast. Not in the closing prayer my father led at the end of the night. Not in the small conversations afterward when relatives hugged him and he held court near the cake table, glowing. I helped stack chairs at the end of the evening. I kissed my mother goodnight. I drove home alone on I-85 in the dark. I remember the exact sound of my turn signal. That mechanical tick in the silence of the car. Patient. Steady. Indifferent to everything I was feeling. I didn't cry until I got inside. And even then, it wasn't grief exactly. It was the specific pain of finally having proof of something you'd suspected for years, but kept refusing to believe.
I was not the daughter they saw.
I was the daughter they used. That was the moment everything shifted. Not into anger, into clarity. And clarity, I had learned from 15 years of accounting, is the most dangerous thing in any room. What I found 3 months later, inside a filing cabinet I'd been trusted with since I was 19, would change every conversation that followed. My father had his cardiac event on a Thursday morning in January 2022. He was at the warehouse when it happened. Not a full heart attack. The doctors were careful with that word, but a significant episode. Enough to put him in a monitored bed at Atrium Health for 4 days. Enough to frighten my mother into silence for the first time in my memory. Enough to make Marcus fly in from Atlanta on the same day. I drove straight from my office. Sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. Brought my mother coffee she didn't drink. Held her hand while the cardiologist explained what had happened and what needed to change. Kofi came on the second day with food from my mother's favorite Senegalese restaurant and a prayer he read from his phone that made my mother weep and call him a blessing sent directly from God. I went back to work. On the third day, my father called me into his hospital room alone. The monitor beeped steadily behind him. He looked smaller in that bed than I had ever seen him. Diminished in the specific way that hospitals make large men look, the gown, the tubes, the overhead light that flatters no one.
He reached for my hand. Zola, he said.
If something happens to me, the documents, you still have them? I told him yes. He nodded, slowly, like a man confirming something he already knew.
Good.
Don't let anyone touch them. Not Marcus. Not anyone. You understand. I said. I understood. He closed his eyes. I sat with him for another hour.
He slept.
2 weeks after he came home, he asked me to go to the house and organize his personal files. Just in case, he said. I want everything in order. He handed me the key to the locked drawer in his home office. The same key he had given me a copy of when I was 19 years old, and he had said, "You're the careful one, Zola, hold on to things." I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning in February. My mother was at church. The house was quiet. I sat on the floor of my father's office for 4 hours going through 30 years of paperwork. Tax returns, mortgage documents, insurance policies, vehicle titles, vendor agreements going back to 2003, written on paper so old the ink had gone faint at the edges. And then, near the bottom of the second drawer, inside a manila envelope held shut with a rubber band that crumbled when I touched it, the original articles of incorporation for Ferreira Transport LLC, filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State's office in April 2006. I had seen these before, briefly, once, when my father first incorporated the business and asked me to witness his signature because I happened to be there and he trusted me, and I was 17 years old and didn't understand what I was looking at. I understood now. I read the document slowly. All 11 pages. The registered agent, Emmanuel J. Ferreira. The primary member, Emmanuel J. Ferreira. 60% ownership interest. The secondary member. I stopped. Read the line again. Zola M. Ferreira. 30% ownership interest. I sat on the floor of my father's office with that document in my hands, and I read that line 4 more times. 30%. Not an employee. Not a helper. Not the daughter who showed up for tax season and cleared the table and drove 4 hours round trip and never asked for anything. A 30% equity partner in a company that owned 12 trucks, a warehouse, active distributor contracts, and had just taken on $180,000 in secured debt that Kofi Mensah had authorized as Director of Operations, a title that appeared nowhere in the founding documents. I photographed every page with my phone.
Twice.
Then I found the operating agreement, filed separately in a green folder behind the incorporation papers. I photographed that too. I found the original registered agent confirmation from the Secretary of State. Photographed it. The amendment filings. There were 2, both minor, neither touching the ownership structure. Photographed everything. I put the rubber band back around the envelope as carefully as I could. Replaced it exactly where I had found it. Closed the drawer. Locked it. Put the key in my coat pocket. Then I sat in my father's office chair for a long time and looked at the wall where he kept a framed photo of the first Ferrera transport truck. A white Freightliner with the company name stenciled on the side in blue letters. My father standing in front of it, arms crossed, 20 years younger, squinting into the sun. I remembered the day that photo was taken. I was 14. I'd helped wash the truck that morning with a bucket and a sponge, and my father had said, "One day this will mean something, Zola." He had no idea how right he was. That Monday, I called a business attorney in Charlotte named Patricia Ose, no relation, just the most precise legal mind I had encountered in 10 years of working with contracts. I told her I needed a consultation. I told her I had documents. She said, "Come in Thursday." I went in Thursday. What she told me in that office confirmed everything I had already suspected sitting on my father's floor. The ownership structure had never been amended, never dissolved, never transferred. I was still legally, formally, on file with the state of North Carolina, a 30% equity partner in Ferrera Transport LLC. And no one had told Kofi Mensah. I did not confront anyone. I did not call Marcus. I did not drive to the warehouse and demand a meeting. I went home. I made coffee. And I started building something much more careful than a confrontation. I want to tell you something about accounting. People think it is a quiet profession. Rows of numbers. Spreadsheets. A job you do alone in a room with bad lighting and no windows. And in some ways that is true. But what accounting actually is, at its core, beneath the software and the tax codes and the reconciliation reports, is the art of finding the truth inside a system that is trying to hide it. Every number tells a story. Every discrepancy is a door. And the person who knows how to read the numbers is almost always the most powerful person in any room, even when nobody realizes she is there. I have been the most powerful person in Ferrera Transport for 16 years. Nobody had realized it yet. I gave myself 90 days. Not to plan revenge. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I was not sitting in my apartment in Charlotte building a trap. I was sitting in my apartment in Charlotte building a record. There is a difference. One is about destruction. The other is about truth. And the truth, I had learned from 15 years of audits and amended returns and corrected filings, does not need your help to be devastating. It just needs to be organized. The first thing I did was pull the North Carolina Secretary of State Business Registry. Public record. Anyone can access it. I searched Ferrera Transport LLC and confirmed what Patricia had told me. The ownership structure on file matched the founding documents exactly. 60% Emmanuel Ferrera, 30% Zola Ferrera. The remaining 10% listed as reserved, a standard placeholder my father had included at incorporation and never assigned. No amendments. No transfers. No dissolution filings. The second thing I did was request a copy of the company's most recent annual report from the state. Also public record. Also confirming the same ownership structure. The third thing I did was ask Patricia to pull the UCC filings, Uniform Commercial Code, the public record system that tracks secured loans against business assets. What she found took her 2 days to compile and another 15 minutes to explain to me clearly. Kofi Mensah, operating as Director of Operations of Ferrera Transport LLC, had authorized 3 financing agreements in the company's name over the previous 18 months. The warehouse equipment lease, the 2 new trucks from the March expansion, and a third agreement I had not known about, a $95,000 working capital line of credit from a commercial lender, drawn down almost entirely with the warehouse property listed as secondary collateral. $95,000. Drawn down in 11 months. I sat across from Patricia in her office on a Wednesday afternoon, and I looked at that number for a long time. Was my father aware of this third agreement? I asked. Patricia looked at the documents. His signature appears on the original line of credit application. But the drawdown authorizations were signed by Kofi Mensah under a general authorization clause your father likely signed without reading the full scope. I closed my eyes for exactly 3 seconds. My father, the man who had built this company across 30 years, who had taught me to read a contract before I signed anything, who had handed me documents at 19 and said you're the careful one, had signed a general authorization clause without reading the full scope. Because he trusted Kofi Mensah the way he had never quite allowed himself to trust me. I opened my eyes. What are my options? I asked Patricia. She folded her hands on the desk. As a 30% equity partner, you have significant rights. You have the right to inspect all company financial records. You have the right to be consulted on major financial decisions that almost certainly include taking on secured debt against company assets. And in the event of a restructuring or creditor action, your signature and consent would be legally required for certain resolutions. I let that settle. What if the company is facing creditor pressure? Then your position becomes considerably more significant. She paused. Ms. Ferreira, do you have reason to believe the company is in financial difficulty? I thought about the $95,000 line of credit drawn down in 11 months. The 2 new trucks on a route expansion that Kofi had pushed for and my father had funded with equity from the warehouse. The fuel costs on 12 vehicles in a market where diesel had been volatile for 2 straight years. I have reason to investigate, I said. Patricia nodded slowly. Then I'd recommend you formally exercise your right to inspect the financial records. We send a letter, certified mail, to your father as primary member, copied to the registered agent. It's a standard legal request. It cannot be refused. I thought about my father, still recovering, still fragile in the way men who have never been fragile don't know how to carry. Not yet, I said. I want to know more before I send anything. Patricia understood. She had that quality, the ability to hear what a client was not saying and respect it. I spent the next 6 weeks doing what I do. I built a spreadsheet. Fuel costs against route revenue, quarter by quarter, for 3 years. Truck maintenance logs pulled from the vendors I still had relationships with from my years helping the business. Payroll estimates based on the driver count Marcus had mentioned casually over Thanksgiving. The warehouse lease payment pulled from the UCC filing. The equipment lease. The line of credit servicing cost. Column by column. Row by row. By the time I finished, the picture was not complicated. Ferreira Transport was spending more than it was making. Had been for approximately 14 months. The line of credit was not a growth tool. It was a bandage on a wound that was still open. And Kofi Mensah, the son God sent when they weren't looking, the man my father had raised his glass to in a banquet hall in front of 61 people, had either not seen it coming or had seen it coming and said nothing. I saved the spreadsheet. Printed 2 copies. Put one in my fireproof lockbox next to the founding documents. Sent the other to Patricia with a note that said, for your file. I think we're getting close. I did not call my father. I did not call Marcus. I did not drive to the warehouse. I waited. And on a Wednesday night 9 days later, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. My Aunt Abina. 9:14 p.m. Zola, please. It's about your father. The business. Things have gone very wrong. I dried my hands on the dish towel, picked up the phone, and said,
I know.
Tell me everything. The call that followed lasted 47 minutes. By the end of it, I understood exactly how bad it had gotten. And I understood something else, that the only person who could fix it was the person they had spent 3 years forgetting. My Aunt Abina talked for 47 minutes straight. I let her. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet under the sink, the same place I always end up when something is too large to process standing up, and I listened to the entire story unspool in real time. Kofi Mensah had been managing the Eastern Route expansion for 14 months. The new contracts he had promised my father, the ones that justified the 2 new trucks, the warehouse equity loan, the optimism at the birthday dinner, had not materialized. 2 distributors had pulled out. A third had reduced their volume by 60% after a delivery dispute Kofi had handled badly and never disclosed to my father. The $95,000 line of credit was nearly exhausted. The truck payments were 30 days behind. And 3 weeks ago, a commercial collections firm had sent a formal demand letter to the warehouse address. My father had found it on his desk on a Monday morning, opened it, and sat in his office alone for 2 hours before telling anyone. He told Kofi first. Kofi told him it was manageable, that he had contacts, that he was working on it, that my father should not worry. My father worried. By the following week, the number had clarified. Between the truck financing, the line of credit, the equipment lease arrears, and 2 outstanding vendor invoices, Ferreira Transport was looking at approximately $340,000 in immediate liability against a cash position of less than $40,000. My father had called Marcus. Marcus had called Annabina. Antabina had called me. Kofi, as far as anyone knew, was still working on it. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When Abina finally stopped talking, the line was quiet for a moment except for the sound of her breathing and the distant noise of a television somewhere in her house. Zola, are you there? I'm here. Your father doesn't know I called you. He's ashamed. You know how he is. I know how he is. Is there anything you can do? I looked across my kitchen at the fireproof lockbox sitting on the shelf above my desk. 16 years of careful. 16 years of being the one who kept things. The one who read the documents. The one who showed up and asked nothing and was handed nothing in return except a seat at a table where her name was never called. I thought about the green dress. I thought about 61 people applauding a man who had been given everything I built access to and had burned through it in 14 months. I thought about my father's hand on mine in that hospital room. Don't let anyone touch them. You understand? I understood. Let me make some calls, I told Abina. Tell my father I'll be in touch. I called Patricia the next morning at 8 a.m. I told her it was time. She sent the formal equity partner inspection request that afternoon. Certified mail to my father as primary member, copied to the registered agent. Standard legal language. Precise. Unemotional. A document that said in the careful vocabulary of business law, I exist. I have rights. And I am paying attention now. My father called me that evening. Not through Marcus. Not through Antabina. Himself. His voice was the voice from the hospital room. Small. Careful. The voice of a man who had just read a legal document with his daughter's name on it and understood, perhaps for the first time, the full weight of what he had always taken for granted.
Zola. Dad.
A long silence. I didn't know things had gotten this bad. I know you didn't. Kofi told me. I know what Kofi told you. Another silence. Longer.
Can you fix it?
I sat at my kitchen table with the founding documents in front of me and my spreadsheet open on my laptop and 15 years of competence that had never once been celebrated in a banquet hall or toasted with a raised glass. I can help fix it, I said. But we need to talk first. About the company. About the documents. About what my role actually is and what it has always been. He came to Charlotte 4 days later. Alone. No Marcus, no Diane, no Kofi. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, and I showed him the spreadsheet first. Column by column. What had come in, what had gone out, where the money had gone and how fast, and what it had bought.
He did not speak for a long time.
Then I opened the founding documents and set them on the table between us. He looked at his own signature at the bottom of the page. Then at mine, Zola M. Ferreira, 30% ownership interest, and something moved across his face that I had not seen there before. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. I forgot, he said finally. His voice was very quiet. I forgot what I put in there.
You forgot about me, I said.
Not as an accusation.
Just as a fact.
The way you'd read a line from a ledger.
Clear.
Accurate. Unmovable. He pressed his hands flat on the table. The same hands that had built 12 trucks from 2 suitcases and a rented room. They were shaking slightly. I'm sorry, Zola. 3 words. No performance. No audience. No raised glass. Just my father at my kitchen table telling the truth for the first time in 3 years. I let them sit there. Then I pulled Patricia's restructuring proposal from my folder and set it in front of him. The plan was precise. Kofi's authorization agreements, executed without proper partner consent, were legally contestable. Patricia had confirmed this in writing. The collections firm was willing to negotiate a structured settlement if the company could demonstrate a credible recovery plan and clear leadership. The 2 underperforming trucks could be sold. The Eastern route contracts renegotiated or dissolved. The warehouse equity loan restructured against a tightened operation. It would take 18 months, maybe 24. It would not be comfortable, but it was survivable. This works, I said, if the company operates with a clear structure. Documented roles. Proper authorization limits. Nothing moves without the right signatures. My father looked at the proposal for a long time. And Kofi? I met his eyes. Kofi's title isn't in the founding documents. It never was. Whatever role he is going forward is a conversation you need to have with him. But it goes through proper process. In writing, with counsel. My father nodded slowly. The nod of a man standing on ground that had shifted under him and was learning, at 62, to find his footing again. He signed the restructuring authorization that afternoon. My signature was already on it. It had always been on it. Kofi Mensah left Ferreira Transport 6 weeks later. No drama. No confrontation. A resignation letter submitted to my father on a Tuesday morning. Professional, brief, the kind of letter a man writes when he understands that the leverage he thought he had was never really his. The collections firm settled at 63 cents on the dollar. The 2 trucks sold within 30 days to an operator in Raleigh. The eastern route was restructured around the 3 contracts that had always been reliable, the ones my father had built before Kofi arrived, the ones I had helped negotiate from a folding table in the warehouse when I was 19 years old. The warehouse stayed. The company stayed. Ferreira Transport filed its next annual report with the North Carolina Secretary of State in April 2023. Ownership structure unchanged. Emmanuel J. Ferreira, 60%. Zola M. Ferreira, 30%. My name, in black and white, on public record, exactly where it had always been. Marcus called me a month after everything settled. He is not a bad person, my brother. He is a person who did not pay close enough attention, which in some families amounts to the same thing. I didn't know, Zola, he said, about the documents, about any of it. I know you didn't. You should have said something earlier.
I thought about that.
About all the evenings I'd spent in that warehouse. All the tax seasons. The $14,000 billing error. The birthday dinner. The green dress. The turn signal ticking in the dark on I-85.
I shouldn't have had to, I said.
He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. You're right. That was enough. My father and I talk on the phone every Sunday now. Not long calls. 20 minutes, sometimes 30. We talk about the business. About the week. About small things. The weather in Charlotte. What my mother is cooking. Whether the Freightliner on Route 3 needs a new alternator. We don't talk about Kofi. We don't talk about the birthday dinner. We don't always talk about the documents. But sometimes, at the end of the call, before we hang up, my father says something he never said to me when I was the one clearing the table and reconciling the accounts and driving 4 hours round trip and asking for nothing. He says, I'm proud of you, Zola. And I say, I know, Dad. And I mean it. Not because the words fix everything. They don't. Some things that get quietly broken over years don't get loudly repaired in months. But they mean something now that they didn't before, because now they are true in a way I can verify. The way I verify everything, with documentation, with evidence, with the steady, patient accumulation of facts. I still have the founding documents. In the fireproof lockbox. In my closet, right where they have always been. I'm sitting on my office balcony in Charlotte on a Friday afternoon writing this in my head the way I've been writing it for 3 years. The city is loud below me. Traffic on Independence Boulevard. A siren somewhere to the east. The glass door behind me has our firm's name on it, Ferreira and Associates, CPA, in clean white letters that catch the afternoon light. Sandra picked the font. I picked the name. I think about my father sometimes building something from nothing, and how the thing he built had my name in it from the very beginning without either of us fully understanding what that meant. I think about the folding table in the warehouse. The spiral notebook. The $14,000 billing error nobody else caught. I think about the birthday dinner and the green dress and 61 people applauding a man who would be gone in 14 months. And I think about this. My father did not mean to forget me. He meant to protect what he built. He just forgot that I was part of what he built. That is not a small thing to forget. But it is a thing that can be remembered. And in our family, slowly, imperfectly, one Sunday phone call at a time, it is being remembered. My name is Zola Ferreira. I am 34 years old. I am a licensed CPA and a 30% equity partner in a freight company my father built from 2 suitcases and a rented room. I did not fight for what was mine. I simply refused to pretend it wasn't. And that, I have learned, is sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do. This story is not about revenge. It is about what happens when someone who has been overlooked for a very long time finally decides to be seen on her own terms. So here is my question for you. Is there something in your life, a document, a right, a role, a truth, that belongs to you and has simply never been claimed? If you made it all the way here, I mean genuinely, truly, all the way to this moment, thank you. Not because you watched a video, but because you stayed with a story that I think you recognized. Maybe not the details. Maybe you've never seen the inside of a freight company or a banker's conference room or a lawyer's office on the second floor of a red brick building on a main street in a town that knows your name before you give it. But I think you know the feeling. The feeling of being the one who shows up, who keeps the documents, who reconciles the accounts and drives the 4 hours and asks for nothing, and somehow still ends up invisible at the table. I think you know what it costs to be the capable one in a family that has decided capable means you don't need anything. And I think some of you are sitting with something right now. A truth you haven't said out loud yet. A boundary you haven't drawn. A document, literal or otherwise, that has your name on it and has never been claimed. I want you to name it. Not for me. For yourself. Drop it in the comments. It doesn't have to be fully formed. It doesn't have to have a resolution yet. You don't have to know how the story ends to be allowed to start telling it. Just say, this is mine. This belongs to me. I have not claimed it yet, but I am going to. That is where it starts. Not with a confrontation. Not with a scene. With a decision made quietly, in your own kitchen, on your own terms. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button. It takes 1 second, and it tells me that these stories are worth telling. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I put everything I have into every story on this channel, and I am just getting started. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who has been the quiet one, the strong one, the one who handles it, share this with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing one person can do for another is simply say, I see you. Someone made a document with your name on it a long time ago. Go find it. My name is Zola. I'll see you in the next one.